there's a transition to breakout rooms, and we're going to explain those in a bit. But before I get started, I really want to take just a little bit of time for us to acknowledge the land that we are on. I saw a post, some people are coming from outside the United States. Welcome everybody. But take a second, if you will, to make a land acknowledgement. And if you will as well, please type that in the chat. I know I'm situated here in this part of the San Gabriel Valley near Los Angeles in Tongva land. So if you can, please type in the chat the land, the sacred land that we're on. And as you're doing that, I also want to honor the memories of our ancestors, of all the people that have enabled us to be here in the present, in this moment. I know sometimes when we speak of ancestors, we could think of intergenerational, of thousands of years that we all come from. But antepasados, ancestors, can also be our grandparents and even our parents. And in an interesting way, one of the things I talk about is the ways in which we can think of children as carrying forward the historical memory of our ancestors. So it's kind of like looking forward generations to also acknowledge where we come from and where we're headed. And so I'm going to be brief. The theme that we have here is on Pedagogies of Love and Justice, Humanizing Ethnic Studies Movements. And it's really important, given the present context and historically what has been taking place, to really center the question of love on the side of justice, of love that responds to injustice, and also to think about the aspect of ethnic studies as anti-racist work, but also more than anti-racist work that's rehumanizing, revitalizing, work that brings and heals. And I think our speakers are going to get into these kinds of themes. So the way we set this up, I'm going to move through these slides. Again, here's the program. We'll have our first keynote, Dr. Anita Tijerina Revilla, who I will introduce in a bit. Then we have a transition. And then our keynote, Dr. Sean Arce. And then we will have a slight transition to the breakouts. Those will be concurrent. So the 4 breakouts, and when we get to this stage, we will give you access links. 3 of these will actually not be housed here in this webinar. You're going to actually go to a different webinar. But the concurrent workshops we have are Monique Marshall, Why Can't He Breathe? The Urgency of Early Intervention in Racial Literacy. We also have Marisol Ruiz with Read Alouds for the Ethnic Studies Elementary Classroom. And we have Kiki Ochoa, Ethnic Studies, Combating White Supremacy with Love and Liberation. And Ron Espiritu, Practical Approaches to Building an Ethnic Studies Curriculum. So 4 very powerful workshops. If you will, one way of maybe thinking about this is elementary, multiple subject, Monique and Marisol, and secondary, Kiki and Ron. So I'm going to move into the next slide here. And I'm going to pass it on to Trish.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm really happy to see so many people here to learn and to share, and can't wait to hear from our speakers. I'm co-president of California Name with Miguel. Thank you to Miguel for all of your hard work, and to our presenters for being here today. We are the California chapter of the National Association for Multicultural Education. NAME is one of the largest multicultural education nonprofits in the world. As California NAME, we've been supporting anti-racist, critical anti-racist multicultural education for years. And in the last 4 years, we've really focused on supporting the statewide K-12 ethnic studies movement that is gaining some serious momentum. And we've been supporting that through networks and our local activism and working with schools and conferences and webinars like this. If you would like to become a member of NAME, you can visit nameorg.org. When you become a member there, you become a member of our chapter. And as you can see on the slide, our website is californianame.org. Next. So please mark your calendars. This is actually a webinar series for next week, Friday, August 7th from 4 to 6. We'll be hearing from 4 powerful scholars, Etta Hollins, Anna Marie Francois, Antoinette Linton, and Cheryl Jones Walker, who are going to share what we need to do to prepare anti-racist teachers. You can register at tinyurl.com/anti-racist-teacher-ed. And that is also on our website if you want to link over from there. Next. And finally, thinking ahead to hopefully a happier and healthier and more hopeful next spring, save the date also for May 21st, 2021, when we will have Dr. Bettina Love keynoting, hopefully our face-to-face in-person conference in Oakland, Abolishing the Colonial Project. So again, Miguel and Ruchi, for all of your hard work, and to our presenters, and I'll pass it back to Miguel. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Trish. So moving along, so it's an honor, really. We're going to start with our first keynote. And I'm going to introduce Dr. Anita Tijerina Revilla. It is truly an honor to have her as a keynote speaker. And I think her lived experience, her academic scholarship, and who she is as a human being is very important to have her here. So Dr. Anita Tijerina Revilla is a mujerista and joteria activist scholar and professor in the Department of Chicano and Latino and Latina Studies at Cal State LA. Her research focuses on student movements and social justice education, specifically in the areas of Chicanx, Latinx, immigrant, feminist, and queer rights activism. Her expertise is in the areas of joteria, queer and Latinx studies, Chicanx education, Chicana, Latina feminisms, and critical race ethnic studies. After receiving her bachelor's degree from Princeton University and a master's degree from Teachers College, Columbia University, she earned her doctorate from UCLA's Graduate School of Education in Social Sciences and Comparative Ed with an emphasis in race and ethnic studies. She is also a visual artist that specializes in acrylic and oil portraiture of mujerista and joteria community. So it is an honor to have Dr. Anita Tijerina Revilla. I know we're on mute, but let's give her a round of applause, and I'm gonna transition to her. I'm unmuting her, and I'm gonna ask her to also share screen. Here we go.
Saludos, everyone. Just give me a second so I can start sharing. And I'm really honored to be asked to participate. And I thank you, Miguel, for all of your wonderful work. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. I wanted to also say that I'm really excited that Bettina Love is being invited because she also talks about spirit murder, which is the focus of my presentation today. So I'm really looking forward to hearing her speak, maybe in person. But if you haven't yet, make sure you look out for her. The title of my presentation is, Will You Be a Spirit Murderer or a Spirit Restorer and Protector? Right? And I'm sharing lessons from my research and my communities, which include mujeristas and joteria. And I'll say a little bit about them throughout the presentation, and I'm happy to talk more about them into the future. I always like to start with my positionality. This is my mother and I, and we are holding a sign that says La Joteria. So you can already see how badass my mom is. And you can kind of get a sense of who I am through this photo. But these are my identities. I am hija de Delia, third generation Tejana. I grew up in poverty. I'm a first generation academic. I was educated in elite and elitist institutions. I identify as queer and fluid, and I am fiercely committed to a multidimensional healing. I'm an activist scholar and a mujerista. And of course, so many of my identities are inherited from my mother, who is Tejana, survivor, fiercely committed, single parent of 3, also continues to live in poverty and is, with the support of what I do we are, you know, moving out of that poverty, but still struggling with it. And I think that's an important point, that when you grow up in poverty, you don't necessarily eliminate it, for your, even for your own immediate family when you become a professional, right? My mother is an hocicona. She's bi-curious, peleonera, believer of justice, a mujerista, and a grandma. And I'll go to the next one. I wanted to situate my research and my talk. It is in a Chicana and Black feminist framework, largely guided by Gloria Anzaldúa and Patricia Williams. And these are some important books that I would love for you to get if you don't already have. They're very popular. And then I want to start with these questions for you all who are listening. And, you know, you don't have to answer, but if you feel like it, you can definitely say something in the chat. Think back to your childhood when someone asked you, what do you want to be when you grew up or you grow up? Can you remember those questions or that question? What were your dreams when you were in elementary school? Did you even have dreams? Did you have the space and capacity to dream of a future, of what you wanted to become? Did you accomplish these dreams? Why or why not? Who or what stood in the way of those dreams? And these questions for me come from the work that I've been studying for a while, in terms of the work of student movement, but also identifying the history of racism, classism, sexism, homophobia, etc. Right? But I remember my mentor, Daniel Solorzano, introduced us to this idea of spirit murder that Patricia Williams wrote about in 1991. And she talked about in the book very quickly kind of the destructive impact that racism has on the human spirit, right? So that racism can have a destructive impact on your physical life, right? It manifests in violence and in social structures, also hurting you. But what some people don't always think about is the impact it has on your human spirit, right? So our spirits can very easily be destroyed by the wounds of racism and sexism and homophobia, transphobia, citizenism, which is another word that one of my colleagues and friends helped me identify, which is discrimination against people who are not citizens, and classism. And so ever since I heard that term, I've been trying to get people to think about how spirit murder is taking place in their life, right? But one of the bigger questions that I like to ask, and I'm trying to move this out of the way so I can see it, just one second, is when and how did your academic spirit murder take place? Right, so many of you are teachers, so perhaps your spirit murder didn't take place academically, or maybe you've been able to protect your spirit even when people have attempted to murder your spirit, right? And then the other question is, have you committed or witnessed a spirit murder, right? And I think that this is something really important for us to think about as educators, is that when you are experiencing attempted spirit murder on a daily basis for multiple years of your life, you tend to forget that spirit murder is taking place, and you go into survival mode, and you often reproduce some of those practices without even knowing it, right? And we talk about internalized oppression, and I want you to think about internalized spirit murder in the same way that we think about internalized oppression. Let's see. And I like to use this visual because I think that people don't always think about all of the different ways that they're experiencing both physical and spiritual wounding, right? And also it's both an individual, a structural, and historical wounding and violence that we experience. So as you can see, there are many aspects of our struggle and the violence that we experience, especially as people of color, as brown, black, and indigenous people who have experienced imperialism and elitism, ageism, colorism, linguistic discrimination. For me, one of the aspects that I look at a lot is mental illness and the discrimination that people experience because of mental illness. That is very present in my life and in my family's life. Even fatism and body discrimination, speciesism, hard to say, but a big reality, environmental racism, geographic discrimination, right? And you can probably add more to this this diagram, and I'm happy if you add some in the chat, because I'm constantly trying to expand my understanding of this wounding. And one of the reasons that it's important is because a lot of us will say, well, I'm anti-racist or I'm a feminist, right? But then you'll commit one of the other isms, right? So there are a lot of Chicano, Chicanx people, for example, who are homophobic and transphobic, and who have internalized classist approaches and anti-blackness, for example. And right now we're in that current movement that is really challenging those aspects of our reality. And I think it's important for us to constantly expand this this diagram to better understand it and better teach our students and community how to put an end to this wounding. Right, and here is a definition of multidimensional battle fatigue. It started, well, first there was the concept of racial battle fatigue, which William Smith coined in 2004. And what he says is that racial battle fatigue is the stress of the constant and omnipresent frontline racial battles that people of color face in historically white spaces can become mentally, emotionally, and physically draining and or lethal from the accumulation or physiological symptoms that often go untreated, unnoticed, and misdiagnosed. And I add to that saying that, as mujeristas, chicanas, queers, and feminists, race is one facet of our battle fatigue, and we are under constant attack, often inside and outside of our own communities, especially in academia. Right, and so my ongoing question is, who will intervene with this spirit murder? Will you intervene? Will others intervene? What is that process? So I like to use Chicana feminist Gloria Anzaldua's writings when I'm thinking about this. She says, the path to desconocimiento leads human consciousness into ignorance, fear, and hatred. It succumbs to righteous judgment and withdraws into separation and domination, pushing most of us into retaliatory acts of further rampage, which beget more violence, right? And I don't think there's a better time to really reflect on how so many of us are disconnected from our knowledge, our ancient knowledge, and our truth of who we really are, right? And that's what desconocimiento is. She says, conocimiento, on the other hand, your understanding, your knowledge, and knowledge of self and history, is the more difficult path. It leads to an awakening, insights, understandings, realizations, courage, and the motivation to engage in concrete ways with the potential to bring us into compassionate interactions. Right? And she talks about this. She says, en estos tiempos de la Llorona, and she's talking about this a long time ago, but I think that this is where we are now. This is the times of the weeping woman, who is part of our cultural history. En estos tiempos de la Llorona, we must use creativity to jolt into awareness of spiritual, political problems and other major global tragedies so that we can repair el daño, the wounding. Right? And she calls this the Coyolxauhqui imperative. And I don't have all of the time to talk about the Coyolxauhqui imperative, but know that the Coyolxauhqui is the indigenous goddess that was basically dismembered by her own brother. And Chicana feminists have tried to, whereas specifically Anzaldúa and others of us who follow her work have tried to reclaim Coyolxauhqui as part of our history and ancestry, and Chicana feminist kind of reimaginations. And she's saying that we all have the imperative to put her back together, right? To understand this ongoing process of making and unmaking. She says there is never any resolution, just the process of healing. The healing of our wounds results in transformation, and transformation results in the healing of our wounds. Right, you can look at this more. I shared the link, but I have talked about a mujerista, which is essentially a Chicanx, Latinx, feminist activist identity. And then joteria is a queer Latinx identity, very similar to mujerista, that is rooted in radical acts of queer love and multidimensional consciousness, right? Those are my ways of remembering my history and my queer story and my mujer story, right? So what I call this is a mujerista and joteria Coyolxauhqui imperative. And when she talks about this in this article that, that I put into the citations of this PowerPoint, she says that there is wounding happening and therefore we are dismembered, similar to the Coyolxauhqui. And she says it is imperative that we remember. We can do that remembering through self-study, ethnic studies, feminist studies, etc. Right? We can do it through laughter, through creation, through healing, and through love. And simultaneously, this is an ongoing process, right? It does not end. Oops, sorry, I just got out of the present form. Hold on. For me, this has looked like the activism that I have both studied and been a part of as a Mujerista action researcher. So this is May 1st in Las Vegas. For those of you who don't know, this was one of the largest Chicanx, Latinx, and worker movements that Las Vegas had seen at the time, and it continues to grow that legacy. And it was a moment where my own students, who were college students, and some were still in high school and community college, and they were part of our activist colectiva, they were part of this movement to shut down the strip and acknowledge that immigrant labor was crucial for our growth and sustenance in Las Vegas. Right, and it really awakened a Mujerista collective that continues to grow today. And this is another action that we were a part of. And part of what you see is like the external resistance that is taking place, but there's a lot of internal work, right? And I think this photo really speaks to that. It's a healing kind of reclamation of our spirits that I can see in this photo. And this is our community as well, which you can see is multi-generational. And a lot of times teachers have this professionalism, right, where we can't really be our authentic selves. We can't really create these friendships and alliances with our students because we've been told by Euro-patriarchal perspectives that that should not be your reality, that you should not, you know, create those relationships, that they're alleged unprofessional. Right? And we very much push back on that idea. These young people have been my teachers. They have taught me how to do this really important transformative remembering work. And a lot of our education has taken place both inside and outside of the classroom, right? And so it's a really powerful force of community. I will try to go through these quickly. These are just snapshots of the people who have been part of my educational community, mostly students and family, feminists and queer people. I invite you to look at the Association for Joteria Arts, Activism and Scholarship, which is another group that I am a part of, another community that we created, again, to bridge our social justice perspectives and visions with a queer Chicanx, Latinx identity. I invite you to look up Radical Monarchs, who was founded by my very good friend, co-founded by my very good friend, Ana Ivette Maria Martinez. She started in the Bay and she's bringing this to Los Angeles. She's essentially teaching the same things that we learned as undergraduates in Raza Women. She has taught and shared a whole curriculum of multidimensional, intersectional, mujerista consciousness and Black feminist consciousness to young Black and brown girls in the Bay. And it's brilliant, beautiful work being done by Radical Monarchs. I think the film is being screened currently right now on PBS, so look out for that. I also want to invite you to look up the work of Yosimar Reyes, who is an undocumented queer poet. And I think he most embodies this idea of reclaiming you know, our identities. And I was going to play for you. How much time do I have left, Trisha? I don't know how much time I have left, but I'm gonna actually go ahead and click it if.
Because to stay human under these conditions, you have to have an understanding of beauty. I love us. Even when our stories are manipulated and exploited, even when we are presented as gloom and doom narratives, I love us. Because at the end of the day, somehow we always manage to make something out of nothing. I love my undocumented people because being undocumented is not political, it's not physical, it is a condition created to keep us from smiling. That look at us, thriving.
Oh. If you need the link, I'll reshare it when I'm done. But I think, you know, follow Yosimar on Instagram and Facebook if you can. His work as a young queer poet and just, you know, organic intellectual, to me is a model of reclaiming, you know, and putting ourselves back together when we were forced into a broken identity by the isms and woundings of this nation. So I'm going to skip through this because I only have a couple of minutes, but I encourage you to think about what it takes for you to put yourself back together, right? I'm reusing this idea of the Koyoshaki, and I'm sharing that I think that we're experiencing this multidimensional attempted spirit murder, and we're really tired, right? We have this battle fatigue. And for some of us, we've internalized it. And for others of us, we're using ethnic and feminist studies and community to resist that, to put ourselves back together. And along with that, we're using a humanization perspective and analysis. We're building compassion and empathy. It's really important for educators. We are in a crisis. We're in a global crisis. People are dying, people are losing work, and people are doing work for their survival that puts them in great danger. And yet teachers are being pushed to use old practices of assessment. And we really need to reimagine that, right? We really need to reclaim a different perspective and different approach to learning and sharing and assessing what is real learned qualities and expectations, right? So I argue that we need to commit to dismantling the structures of violence. We need to do that while also cultivating truth, joy, authenticity, laughter, healing, right? And it's a continued recommitment. Please look at the work of Dr. Bettina Love. She calls for co-conspirators and abolitionist teaching, right? And again, please try to check her work out and go to her lecture if you're able to. Lastly, I'll share these questions. Has anyone ever attempted spirit murder on you? Who will intervene so that my spirit is not destroyed? What role will I play in protecting my spirit and the spirit of others around me? How will I heal the emotional and institutional violence that I have already survived? Lastly, will I be a spirit restorer and protector, or will I be a spirit murderer? I hope that we can do some restoration and protection, at least for the self, if not for others. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you. Gracias, Dr. Anita Tijerina Revilla. Very, very powerful message. And I can't wait to sit in one of your lectures, to be honest, at Cal CLA when all this is done, meaning the shelter in place and all this. So muchas gracias. Thank you. And I'm going to share my screen and continue to introduce our next keynote speaker. So I will introduce Dr. Sean Arce. He is entering his second year of teaching ethnic studies at Performing Arts Community School at the Diego Rivera Learning Complex in LAUSD in South Central LA. Before that, for 2 years, he served as a teacher on special assignment, working with educators to implement the social justice standards in the Santa Monica Malibu School District. The 2 years prior, Arce created and taught the first Chicano, Latino, and Latina studies classes in Azusa Unified School District. Arce was a co-founder and former director of the nationally renowned and now banned K-12 Mexican American Studies Department in Tucson, Arizona. And he received the first Miles Horton Award for teaching people's history from the Zen Education Project in 2012. As an activist urban educator who has worked in public schools for over 20 years, Arce believes that what made his colleagues and himself effective was the implementation and continuous development of a barrio pedagogy. Within this innovative and transformative pedagogy, indigenous epistemologies and social justice-based frameworks were utilized, where students and teachers in collaboration co-constructed an educational experience that fostered an academic identity and the development of a strong cultural identity. Arce obtained his PhD in language, reading, and culture from the University of Arizona, his master's in educational leadership from Northern Arizona University, and his bachelor's of arts in Mexican American studies from the University of Arizona. So please help me welcome Dr. Sean Arce, and you can clap also through the Zoom feature, and I will transition my screen now to Sean.
Wow. That's all I could say right now. That was very impactful, Dr. Tijerina Revilla. That was really touched our almas. I know it really caused a lot of introspection, or if we say tezcalipoca, that critical self-reflection, your talk right now. And I love how you frame, you're going to be a spirit murderer, or you're going to protect the spirits, and how do we go about doing that? And I think it's a great segue, and it's thank you so much. I wish I had more time to actually process that and look at that. Pero nonetheless, we have a talk to do so. But Tlaxcomati, thank you very much. Black Love, Brown Pride, Developing Ethnic Studies in South Central Los Angeles. I got the red, black, and green to center Blackness right now, because I think the moment really calls for it. And, it always calls for that centering our Black familias, our Black brothers and sisters. So with that, I'd like to honor them with those, the red, black, and green, the RBG, right?
So Sean, I don't know if you're, sorry to interrupt, if you're on the correct screen. I think
Oh, you all can see it? Can you see it?
we're seeing 4 tables, race and ethnic identity, some amazing thing you can share with us.
My other work. Let me see if my bad. Momento. Can you all see that? That's good? Okay, my bad. All right. So that's the question. That's a question that I have. I'm so honored. Again, I'm going into my second year at teaching at Performing Arts Community School at Diego Rivera, a learning complex on Central Avenue in Gage. And it's an extreme honor. It's given me a beautiful challenge and, you know, endless opportunities, and it's given me a real chance to grow, you know. And in starting this talk, I'd like to, you know, pose some questions. How do we, these two communities, right, that I'm so honored and privileged to work with, and their familias and serve those familias, how do we honor those families? How do we honor those histories, those distinct histories, right, that need to be honored in a distinct way, but also recognize and honor, you know, our shared struggles? And so that's why I place these up there, because it's very localized, and geography and place is very important. South Central Los Angeles, as I've learned, I knew a little bit about it before I went to work there, but it has a beautiful, rich history, and a beautiful current history and struggle. And so that's the main thing that I'm really working toward and working with these youth, and facilitating that, right? And protecting, honoring those, our antepasados, Black and brown, those 7 generations that came before us, honoring ourselves, right? I have a little problem with the word pride, but I love the Black, you know, the brown pride. Black love, brown pride is a beautiful, beautiful moniker. But at the same time, do we want to bring pride to facilitate pride in and with our students, or do we want to bring about honor, right? And so that is the question. So I'm going to show you a clip right now. One of my students hit me up. He's like, "Hey, mister, my dad's in this, peep this video out." And it's to contextualize. It's not to romanticize. It's not to, let me show you it. Let me show you.
And now, the wondrous world of...
Hey, come to Los Angeles. You and your family can have peace and tranquility. Enjoy a refined
Hello, my name is Elaine, and I'll be your tour guide through South Central Los Angeles.
How to survive in South Central. A place where carrying the strap, you know it's Mando. No, you come through my hood, you get your hands shook. Take a close look and get your bands took. Rule number 1, do this shit for fun. Bust 9 in your ass, so beat down. Keep it in your lap, let's start this. Cause haters, man, I love to spark shit. You know I'm right, so it's fuck the police. A Mexican in the life of cold streets. All I do is talk real. I keep my mind on my money, can't stop, I doubt I ever will. So don't get sparked, and fuck your question. And that's the first lesson on staying alive in South Central. That's how you survive.
Are you enjoying your stay in South Central Los Angeles? Or is somebody taking your thing? Have you witnessed the drive-by? Make sure you have your camcorder ready to witness the extracurricular activities on Black Side of the Lake, so you and your family can enjoy this tape.
So I show that to contextualize and not to essentialize. This is all what South Central is all about, but it's very important to honor place and to recognize the material conditions that our students are subjected to. And it's undeniable, those material conditions. Those material conditions have an impact. The popular culture on a local level. I wish we could look at corridos that are coming out of, narco corridos that are coming out of South Central Los Angeles, these beautiful young folks, you know, producing this, but it needs to be critiqued, right? And so how do we critique that? How do we survive in South Central Los Angeles, right? Taking off of Cube's infamous, what was it, 1992, How to Survive in South Central. And I believe, you know, it's not about survival. It's about, again, taking the words, borrowing the words from, the palabra from Dr. Tiarina Revilla, is, you know, how do we protect the spirits? How do we thrive, right? How do we make ourselves whole? So I'm trying to implement a holistic education. And there's some great models. I still utilize those Mesoamerican, those indigenous epistemologies as a framework, but at the same time, we have to evolve and incorporate, not substitute, but incorporate some of the new models. And I'm very lucky to be, to have knowledge of the California, the Ethnic Studies Committee that originally came up with the values that we should be teaching in our schools, right? In a K through 12 ethnic studies context. And this was led by our Filipina sister and Tolteca from here from Los Angeles, Tracy Buenavista from Cal State Northridge, right? Allison Tintiago Cubales. And so these are great, it's a great framework, and I'm gonna carry us through how I this year actually made sure to touch on each and every one of these, maybe not simultaneously. And as you notice, there's a tremendous amount of conceptual overlap in these tenets and these values and these principles of ethnic studies. I'm gonna briefly go over these. One, cultivate empathy, community actualization, cultural perpetuity, self-worth, self-determination, and the holistic well-being of all participants, especially Native peoples and people of color. And so that again falls in line with this holistic, how do we make ourselves whole, that from this dismemberment, from these material conditions that our students and familias are subjected to in South Central Los Angeles. Celebrate and honor Native peoples of the land and communities of color by providing a space to share their stories of struggle and resistance, along with their intellectual and cultural wealth. You know, I've been worked in Tucson and mainly barrio Mexican origin schools, worked in Azusa, mainly Mexican origin, but a significant amount of Centroamericanos, right? Santa Monica, very interesting district. You have huge disparities with Black and brown and white. You have socioeconomic disparities. But this place that I'm at right now is a beautiful place. I knew I was in the right place to be doing this work, and because it's going to allow me to grow and challenge and allow me to learn from our familias and our students. Center and place high value on pre-colonial, ancestral, indigenous, diasporic, familial, and marginalized knowledges. Critique empire, white supremacy, anti-Blackness, anti-indigeneity, racism, patriarchy, cis heteropatriarchy, capitalism, ableism, anthropocentrism, and other forms of power, right? All of those systems of oppression, right? We gotta identify those with our students, because we ourselves as teacher facilitators are still struggling with those, right? Just like Doctora Tiarina Revilla talked about. Challenge imperialist, colonial, hegemonic beliefs and practices on ideological, institutional, interpersonal, and internalized levels. Connects ourselves to past and contemporary resistance movements that struggle for social justice on global and local levels to ensure a true democracy. And then lastly, and we're seeing a lot of this from our young people right now, is actually conceptualizing, imagining and building these new possibilities, right? And, or maybe some of us can relate to that decolonial imaginary, right? that what's going to be our future, and our youth are definitely taking the lead on that right now, on that that transformative resistance, that critical hope, and that radical healing. And just sharing with you all one of the first principles. I'm not going to go over each and every one of these, but some highlights of some of these ethnic studies principles and domains and tenets, if you will, is that cultivation of empathy, community actualization, cultural perpetuity, self-worth. I wrote on a piece a while back on why we should have ethnic studies in school, and you know, one of the first point that I put forward was to develop a positive image of self and community. And so honoring our comunidades in South Central Los Angeles, right? And so I do, borrowing from Dr. Luis Genaro Garcia, I do this loteria. And so, and I make sure students have to create and write on in narrative form, you know, create an image of a positive image of self and community. And one of my young students, she chose a picture of her dad who was incarcerated. And that is the reality in South Central LA. And so I didn't struggle with it, but I questioned her. I said, Mija, how was this explained to me? How is this a positive image of ourself and community? She goes, Mister, that's my dad. You know, I love him. He's incarcerated right now, but, and so we have to honor that. We have to cultivate that empathy and honor those, excuse me, those social realities that our students are experiencing. A tremendous amount of our familias are essential workers. Many of our familias got sick in the Farmer John's plant right there on Santa Fe, right? And that is another economic reality, but we have to honor that, right? We have to honor that. And so integrating this Quetzal artist was a blessing that I came across that in the later part of the year when we're talking about essential workers. All of my students, both black and brown, parents and themselves, essential workers, right? And then helping the local economies, right? One of the reasons is the wonderful food that the students bring in slang at school, right? So I have a little joke there, you know, a note to teachers: support brown economies, buy tortas made by your students and their parents, right? But little things like that, to engaging in academic and intellectual exercises and analysis, is all important. And it's cultivating that empathy. It's developing a positive image of self and community. And it is really, you know, practicing a form of self-determination and honoring ourselves. Celebrating and honor Native peoples, right? Teaching that history, engaging our students in that history, that brown folks, right? As indigenous folks, we are not foreign, right? We have a north-south trajectory that has gone on for hundreds, if not thousands of years, right? And there's a lot of evidence, right, to really suggest that from the linguistic, if we could look at linguistic maps, if we could look at trade, and that's still continuing today. That's just not something that is historical, but is happening right now. And to really be intentional with our Centroamericano students, you know, there's a migration, a constant migration because of US policies right now in Central America. You know, current events happening at Grand Park 2 years ago it was, Indigenous Peoples Day, the Columbus statue was taken down. So really honoring the native peoples of these lands. The next tenet is critiquing empire, white supremacy, anti-blackness, and anti-indigeneity, etc. And we've been so fortunate to come across the $1 Million Hoods project. And as you see there on the map, Los Angeles, you know, taking from Dr. Little Hernandez, you know, she writes upon, you know, the very beginnings of mass incarceration began in Los Angeles, and it remains the largest center of incarceration in the world. And if you look at the 9001 zip code, where I teach, where Florencia is, where we are but it right next to traditional Black neighborhoods. It is the epicenter of mass incarceration in LA County, in California, and in the world, in our zip codes. So that is something that we can critique, right? How are we going to come about this? This is a manifestation of white supremacy. This is a manifestation of anti-Blackness. So the disproportionate amount of my students whose familia members are incarcerated is real. And so this gives them a chance to analyze it in a really academic way, write on it, and in a more holistic sense, really heal from that. And knowing that history that Dr. Little Hernandez has written about, and learning that, and really planning on what are the next steps, right? Connecting ourselves to past and contemporary resistance movements, right? Looking at the Sailor riots and looking at the Sleepy Lagoon, people often think, yes, a lot of the Sailor riots took place in East Los Angeles, Boyle Heights, but where it initially popped off and where a lot of that Pachuco culture emerged from was South Central Los Angeles, and it's undeniable the Black influence on the Pachuco culture, and then really centering La Pachuca, a too often forgotten piece of this historical narrative. And then making those connections to today, right? What do the attacks on Black and brown youth look like today, right? And again, it is undeniable with mass incarceration, the narratives of my students, particularly my Black and brown, the young men are really harassed by the police, by law enforcement, by the state. And so those connections are made so the students don't see this something as a phenomenon in isolation. Rather, they see it as part of a continuous history of colonialism, of racism, of anti-Blackness, of anti-indigeneity that has taken place. But moreover, the resistance that has been put forth through these cultural art forms such as La Pachuca, right? Or the linguistic practices of our youth, both Black and brown youth, how those have been utilized to resist these forms of oppression and subjugation. Challenging imperialist colonial hegemonic beliefs and practices. Why, just like South Central is the 90001 zip code is the highest, has the highest incarceration rate in the world, where our school resides and where our familias live. It also has the zip code with the #1 overcrowdedness in the nation. Okay, a beautiful article piece, an interactive mapping piece came out, how race, class, and place fueled pandemic. My students ate that up, and they could not believe. They were like, I thought New York was the most overcrowded and the most, no, it's the zip code in which we live. We have multiple familias that live there that are restricted to working these essential jobs, if you will. So if we overlap these maps of mass incarceration, of who is getting sick from COVID-19, who is dying from COVID-19, where the essential workers are, where it is most overcrowded, it's very interesting to see the epicenter is right in South Central Los Angeles. So that is how we challenge. So what are we going to do about that, right? These imperialist colonial hegemonic beliefs and practices of pushing people into this type of labor, of creating these conditions where multiple familias, because the rent is rising rapidly because of the building of the stadium in Inglewood, right? Gentrification is taking place, so multiple familias are living in one-bedroom apartments. And so those are a lot of our students. But more importantly, what are we going to do? What is our plan? So at the end of the year, it was poco a poco, little steps, but we wrote our local Congress representatives, our LA County Board of Supervisors, and the mayor and the city council person. So we're going to follow up with that. That's going to be a continuation of our praxis, if you will, next year coming up. Again, connecting ourselves to past and contemporary resistance movements right down the street on 41st and Central. We're engaged, less than a mile away, folks. And our students did not know this, right? Where this was the first time in which LAPD utilized SWAT in the country and raided the Black Panther headquarters there on 41st and Central. And what people don't know is there was only 2 adults out of close to 20 adults in that building that had a standoff and a shootout. And most of those young adults were young women, right? Angela Davis, there was a film on it, and Angela Davis got arrested outside. This is a beautiful, beautiful history, but we have no one to blame but ourselves as educators that our students don't know this. And this brought a tremendous amount of honor to our Black youth in these classes, in that they saw a history of resistance. They saw that, no, we're not just, being subjected in isolation. This is a continuous history and legacy of colonialism and racism that has taken place. So, I would argue the same thing would take place here in East Los Angeles, right? Many of the youth don't know, for example, Ruben Salazar Park. We're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the Chicano moratorium, and we have no one to blame but ourselves. But local geographies are so critical because new opportunities can emerge. We can honor those local geographies, right? And those are some projects that I encourage all of our ethnic studies teachers to partake in, and to really honor those local geographies and those local histories. Because unfortunately, our students don't know that has been denied to our students, right? That history has been submerged. So it's our responsibility as teacher facilitators, ethnic studies, liberatory educators to really, unbury that and bring it up and make sure that our students are the ones who reemerge and reimagine these possibilities. Connecting ourselves to past and contemporary resistance movements. We talked about Black Lives Matter the entire year. And we talked about the disproportionate killings of Black and brown youth and studied those numbers. Here in LA, because of the local geography and the demographics, the majority of those young people and those men that are killed and women that are killed, well, the majority of the women that are killed are Black, but the majority of the men that are killed are raza, are brown young men for the most part. So honoring, school had ended, and the murder by LA Sheriff's Department of Andres Guardado, right? It was beautiful to see our students out there, right? Because that is that's their area. That's where they live. That's where they reside. That's where they work, etc. So we need to connect ourselves to past and contemporary movements, and that includes, being out there on the streets and going out there and marching to the Sheriff's Department through Compton was beautiful. When you see that Black and brown solidarity, you see that our different comunidades interacting, engaging, hugging, when we shouldn't be, because we should be social distancing, but nonetheless, that is critical, right? And we were there, and our students were there, and violence erupted, as you could see right there. We were right there on the front. No reason why these LAPD, but I'm glad no one got hurt, but I'm really glad my students saw it firsthand. When you have multi-generational familias out there, children in strollers, etc., it was a real reawakening for me, didn't surprise me, but it shocked me, and it was a real reawakening of what is going on. And then lastly, to conceptualize and reimagine that tenet, right? That tenet of reconceptualizing, and the youth are doing that. The youth are doing that. Just like the greater Black Lives Matter movement is led by Black women and Black queer women. A beautiful thing happened a few weeks ago in Los Angeles Unified School District, in that young Black women in LAUSD took the charge, right? They took the charge and they pushed the school district, something we would never have thought of happening before. And it was a group of young Black women that pressed and pressured the LA Unified School Board. And that's a huge victory. The LAUSD police is not totally defunded, but a significant amount, we're talking millions and millions of dollars, which will now be redirected and aimed at serving our underserved and traditionally marginalized Black youth. So that is a beautiful thing. That's something that we can all learn from. And reimagining, I miss my students. I miss the classroom environment, the classroom ecology. These young, beautiful Black and brown homies right here. I think about them every day, and many of them are working in really unsafe conditions. A couple of them here work in some of the food warehouses in downtown. So I'm really worried about their health and what will be, what's going to be taking place in terms of their well-being, right? But these are realities, much like Dr. Tiarina Revilla says, we have to rethink ourselves as ethnic studies educators, as ethnic studies teachers. We ourselves have to take the lead of our youth and reimagine and rethink and redo and restructure, and what are the practices, what are the processes that are going to take place in order for us to be most effective in serving the holistic needs of our Black and brown youth. And so with that, I'd like to end. I just had some pictorials up here to share with you all what took place this past year for me. And I'm extremely excited to get back to work. I've been working nonstop to see how I'm going to re-engage and how I'm going to optimally engage in this distance learning platform, right? And so with that, Tlasukamati, everyone, thank you for being here, and thank you all the Dr. Tiarina Revilla. I'm definitely going to incorporate and read your work and see how I'm going to use this with our students. But I'd like to leave us with some parting words. Is let's be intentional, ethnic studies educators. Let's be intentional in centering Black and brown youth. Let's be intentional in centering young Black women, young queer Black folks, right? Young queer brown folks. Let's be intentional in facilitating, right? And co-constructing new knowledges and new possibilities and new reimaginations, if you will. And that's what I'm going to do is really have that intentionality in mind, and in order for us to be more effective and to strengthen our communities. Gracias a todos, Tlasukamati. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. It is an honor, brother. Thank you for your words. And I'm always on a personal level, reminded of the historicality and it's always alive, and we always can change it. And also, you know, Doctora Tijerina Revilla, Anita, gracias, thank you. And I wish we could have more, we can reflect, and, you know, we can make it a little more of a discussion, but we're going to transition to workshops to honor time. And also, in terms of workshops, just want to share and remind folks of what these workshops are. Let me just get to the screen. Here we go. So the breakout concurrent sessions, you're going to attend one and pick one. Monique Marshall's Why Can't He Breathe? The urgency of early intervention in racial literacy. We have Marisol Ruiz walking people through read alouds in the ethnic studies elementary class. So both Monique and Marisol are emphasizing, if you will, the lower grades working with children. However, everything can be reinvented, and you don't have to be an elementary teacher or have that background to participate in that. Then Kiki Ochoa, ethnic studies, combating white supremacy with love and liberation. And Ron Espiritu, who's bringing practical approaches to building ethnic studies curriculum. So in the chat, we've posted the links for Monique's workshop, for Marisol's workshop, and Ron's workshop. And both Monique and Ron, they actually have like a passcode. You may be asked, so please, let's take the next like 4 minutes or so to transition. What I will say though, for workshop presenters, feel free to honor the hour, but also I know because folks have things going on. There may be a dinner or a kid to tend to, or a tia or somebody. So maybe, hopefully, you allow the workshops to flow for an hour, but if folks have to step out, that's organic to them, then they have to leave. If you're with Kiki, stay in this room. So everybody else, gracias, thank you, Tlazo Kamati, you know, so venture off into the workshops. And if you're staying here in this room, that's going to be Kiki's workshop, which will start in about 3-4 minutes. And we don't reconvene. I forgot to say that. So it's a little odd doing these online spaces, but, you know, more learning happening. And I will repost the links too, because it gets kind of real busy. I'm going to repost in order. So we're in that transition time now. Let me do Monique's first. Here we go. I'm going to repost Ron Espiritu's workshop. And I'm going to repost Marisol's workshop. And again, Kiki's will stay here in this room. There we go.